Okay, Sarah, maybe we make a start.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. Lots of familiar faces, so old and new friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've seen some GCF community panel members and trustees, so it's wonderful to have quite a selection of people join us today. Essentially, this is about the cost of living crisis. We're thinking about our response now to what's happening. We are doing a piece of research around healthy communities, and we're continuing that piece of research, joining on from our last piece of research, which was looking at the pandemic crisis. So this is a real opportunity to hear on the ground what is happening for all of you, and we would really welcome when we get to the questions, if you put your hand up, I will go around and chair the meeting and really encourage some really good discussion to share what everybody is going through, and then finish off for next steps, which is a following meeting around some of the solutions and how we can come together in supporting those solutions. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know us, we are a community foundation, which is an independent charity, but we're part of a national, if not global, organisation network. In this country, we are 47 community foundations. We've just actually come out of a 3-day conference of 500 of us around the country and various other countries around the world who've joined in on what has been a really inspiring 3 days. So part of it is we've got to look at the response now, but this conversation was about how we imagine the future, and that will be our next session, because it's really important getting caught up in today's issues that we don't forget to think about how we want to see our future. So essentially, being part of this incredible network is the sharing of information and the inspiring conversations that we have, but then bringing it back to our local counties and having those conversations on our doorsteps. If you look at the power of community foundations, we sit on a 614, we delivered 614 million. It's about 1 billion of grants. So in 2020 alone, we delivered 98 million in grants. The focus, I guess, for community foundations is very much about small grassroots. Our average size across the network is around £3,500. We fund where others may not. So we fund maybe the less known organisations or the underfunded organisations, and we also fund where there may be overlooked issues that aren't maybe as popular or mainstream, but are just as important and just as impactful. So we have a very wide remit of funding all causes, all issues across the whole of the county. But I would say we are one of those who loves to breathe life into our grassroots community groups and give opportunity, and maybe some of those new startups, which is where a lot of new startups sometimes turn into huge movements. In 2021, so our foundation, we awarded over 200 grants totaling around 750,000, but that is a rather big decrease on our exceptional year in 2020, when our grant making increased fourfold. So we supported about 1.2 million in that year. So it was a huge year for everybody. It was a wonderful year where we did see a real height in donations, a real height in activity, because we all had a shared purpose. We were all going through a crisis, and that meant donations were coming through in a period of time where we really, really needed it. And collectively over the 2 years, we've supported over 350 charities, equates to about 184,000 people. So this year, as we all feel, it's very different. This year, our funds are more limited as the financial influx of COVID has disappeared, in line with general charitable donations declining. We have a role, I guess, as a community foundation. One of our roles is philanthropy. We must try and get across this current crisis, which isn't being felt and seen by everybody. We must try and leverage new money and new interest. And that is our role, to increase philanthropy and increase charitable donations that we can then distribute across the county where it's most needed. So we've launched the Cost of Living Crisis Fund. Many of the community foundations across the country have also done the same. This is about highlighting what is happening in communities right now on the ground. And if you are paying your bills and you aren't necessarily affected by this crisis, you are not going to know of the desperate need that we have right now. So next slide, please. So our vision, a really simple one, and I'm sure shared by many, and that is Gloucestershire is a place where people and communities are empowered to become resilient and strong. So we are reacting to today, but we are also wanting to remain about thinking about what is the future. Next slide, please. So for those who don't know us, our three core elements of our community foundation work, we're all structured in a similar way, but all work very differently. So philanthropy is one of our services. We support 47 fundholders and donors in their individual giving, whether they're individuals, families, charitable trusts and businesses. And it's for us to inspire them to continue giving and continue supporting the county, as well as encouraging people who may want to support their county but don't know how to, and how is that possible, and all the incredible charities in our communities that we can open the doors to. Grant making, we're here to serve our charities. Importantly, we have 4 programs: our main grants program, our High Sheriff program and our Freemasons program, and we do seasonal programs. Each season we do a surviving winter campaign, but actually we've replaced that with the Cost of Living Crisis Fund, which is not just going to be over the Christmas and winter period. This is very much about looking over the next year and supporting and increasing philanthropy to deal with our current crisis. The third element, it's a bit fluffy, but it's impactful if we try and leverage the resources and connections that we have, our civic influence and community convening. That role is about how we're working to champion the excellent things happening in Gloucestershire communities. We encourage collaboration and the help to join the dots. Our role in leadership is to make things happen rather than for position. As a funder, we're very conscious of the perceived perception of power. And for us, we want to be here to influence on leveraging power for good, that we're not here for position, but we are here to help create change and support those who create the real changes on the ground. Next slide, please. So I'll hand you over to our grants manager, Sarah. Many of you will have dealt with Sarah for the last 3 years, who's tirelessly working away at getting money out. And I'm sure many of you will have spoken to her. This is Sarah's side of the organisation, importantly about developing our programmes, launching programmes and distributing funds. So I'll hand you over to Sarah, who will talk through the Cost of Living Crisis Fund that we are opening today.
Right, good afternoon. I've got it right this time. It's the afternoon. So, I'm just going to run through this really quite quickly for you because the details are on our website, and I think probably this afternoon the most useful thing is going to be hearing from all of you and you to be able to share a little bit more. So I don't want to take up too much time talking through this. So we've opened today actually on our it's on our website, or should all be live. As an online application form now to apply for grants of up to £2,500. Now this is going to be a rolling grants programme, because what we want to do is distribute money as quickly as we can, but we have to have that money before we can distribute it. So we're fundraising at the same time as being able to award grants. We wanted to be able to be open so that as we come to these winter months, which are going to be even harder as the temperatures drop and we all feel that pinch of increasing the cost of food, increasing the cost of heating, that we're actually starting to get money out. As we did with COVID, we wanted to try and get funding out as quickly as we could so it's not delayed. This is going to be supporting organisations helping the most vulnerable people in communities, so people that are struggling with the cost of living, and that could be from all sorts of different reasons. So I imagine a lot of you here are in that position with your organisations that you're working with. There are going to be a lot of people in our county this year who are finding life particularly hard, I think. As I said, there's no set deadlines for applications on this one, so it's a case of applying when you can. We may have to pause at times so that we can raise some more funding before we're able to issue more grants. But we will try to keep our website updated, and if you've applied and you've got an application that's in progress, then we will let you know what's happening with that timeline. But our aim is really to be able to review these applications quite quickly and get funds out sort of within a month of applying. I've really tried to simplify the application form here as well, to try and make sure that it's not a really lengthy process, and it's just really asking you about how you would use those funds and who you would be supporting. And again, that should hopefully make it a quicker process. If we do amazingly well with our fundraising, then it might be that we start to see if people would need top-ups to those grants, because I'm aware that it's not a vast amount of money, but hopefully it's an amount of money that will be able to make a difference. We also want to just be able to share it as much as we possibly can, because we can foresee there being quite a lot of demand for this kind of funding. So some examples of the kind of things that we will fund through the fund would be anything that's really helping people that are vulnerable or are in poverty. So that could be with our Surviving Winter Grants programme, we fund things like vouchers for heating, provision of food, provision of even things like blankets and things like that to help people to stay warm across the winter. It could be things that are providing company for people, or a warm place to come and meet, or it might be things like providing essential household items or hygiene items. I know people are struggling to be able to fund. It could be things like projects that reduce isolation and loneliness and give somebody who's really having a hard time somebody to talk to. Projects that might improve mental health for people that are in real distress at this time. Access to local services or perhaps information services. So if you're providing guidance or signposting for people that are having a difficult time at the moment, then that would also be something that we would support. So guidance, practical support, emotional support. And then trying to take a little bit of a longer term view, opportunities for learning and skills development that might help people, rather than just a sort of instantaneous grant that can help straight away with essential items. There might be something that would be able to build people's life opportunities of moving further on. So that's kind of me really. If anyone's got any questions just about the funding before we move on to our own questions that we've got for you really, to find out about what your needs are, do say, and I will do my best to answer questions.
Could you click off the slide, Sarah, and we can see everybody? Brilliant. Any questions on the funding? Any questions on the programme? So we've set up a target of £100,000. We've reached £25,000 already. We have had donations from people we've never met or heard from before that have been inspired to help our community. because of the support we've had from media, whether it's an article in Punchline from Mark Owen, whether it's being on Gloss Radio or BBC Points West. We're having a lot of support from our local media, and that really is helping get the message out. So what's so important is hearing from you today, because the collective conversation of bringing all sectors together, all people together, all communities together, we must try and leverage more funding coming into this programme. We are seeing a huge decline in donations coming across our sector. The alarming stats that we put together actually made us as a staff team feel very panicked, and we had to sort of calm ourselves down and say, well, we're going to do what we can to start leveraging more money. But the stats were alarming, and they are the conversations I'm having with people that are also shocked when I give them the statistics of our county, things that they've never heard or seen yet, whether it's talking to Steve Nibbs and saying, look, this is what's happening, and he's saying, well, I've never heard that before. So it's really important, where there's a crisis which only a few people are feeling and lots of people aren't, how do we get the message across without being doom and gloom and depressing everyone? How do we get the message across by saying there are some solutions here? We obviously need funding, and we need to fund our community groups that are supporting the most vulnerable people in our communities. But there's also other things like volunteering, which has declined enormously, and I know resources like volunteering need to be inspired as well. So two of the things that got us on this journey is our local food bank, who is experiencing 4% donations this year compared to 30% in 2019, yet their rise in need is up 55%. So already some of these statistics are really alarming. We're listening to people who are trying to do the preventative work, the action work, like the Citizens Advice, who are getting 2 distress calls a minute nationally, and their need is going up 20% in the county. So if we can help people in distress, talking about debt, talking about crisis, and that help can come in from voluntary people volunteering, then it may mean that they don't hit the food banks, that they're able to deal with some of the issues they can at the very start of where the problems are starting. We're seeing I guess the new trends of 2 working parents queuing at food banks. We've not really seen that before. You know, you're needing to earn at least £45,000 a year to pay your bills. So some of these things we haven't seen before, and it does feel worse than the COVID crisis, because there was a lot of money coming through COVID. Everyone was very motivated to help because we all were going through something. And now we must try and help the people that are going through this crisis, and help those who aren't understand that they have the ability to support. So if there's no questions on funding or our programme, I'd love to move on to opening up on our first questions and getting your feedback and help educate us and everybody in the room about what's going on, maybe for your charity, maybe for your staff teams. And some of your staff teams are going to be some of those people who are struggling to pay their bills, along with trying to support your beneficiaries. So we really need to get this conversation. I'm hoping someone from BBC Points West did say they were joining today, and I'm hoping, as they've asked me, if any of the charities would like to showcase the work they do, try and encourage anybody who wants to come forward and take part in some of the media work, that we get some interest also on this call. Right, let me just go in. I'm just seeing if we've got Sarah. Is there anyone in the chat box that needs their questions answering before we open the floor? Jackie Frost, do you have a crowdfunding page for smaller grants to be given, perhaps needed money from electricity rebates? Yeah, that crowdfunding piece was interesting, actually. I think the Cotswold District Council have done a very good crowdfunding piece of work. And there does seem to be crowdfunding as another avenue of being able to leverage funds. So we are doing the strapline, donate the rebate, a bit like Surviving Winter. Pass along, if you don't need that government funding, please pass it along. So donate the rebate is a really important piece. If people don't need that £400, that is being distributed to everybody. But we're also asking people to support in other ways. Maybe if they can give more, that would be wonderful. And we've given given examples of what that money would do, whether it's 10, £5 up to thousands of pounds, and the impact it would have. So yes, crowdfunding is definitely something we need to look at in order to leverage further resources. Sarah, have we set up a physical hosting site for Stroud which does this and more? Oh, brilliant. So maybe Anna, when we get to it, if you could let everybody know what you're doing. So if there's any actions that you're doing in your districts, your areas, that are really positive and doing well and we need to know about, please share them. So our first question out to everybody to start the conversation. Sarah, if you could pop the slides up just for a moment. Our first slide and first question. Are you experiencing an increase or a decrease in demand for your support or services? Would anyone like to kick us off?
Oh, I will.
Great. Who's that?
Hi, I'm Tracy Bayliss.
Tracy, brilliant.
Hi, I'm the Fundraising and Development Coordinator for the Nelson Trust based in Gloucester and for Swindon. And I would say we've seen an increase in demand for women's services, basically from simple things like the amount of young people, I would say young women that are getting in trouble with the police, through substance misuse because they are struggling financially, their mental health is deteriorating. So people are really struggling to cope with all the other pressures, which then obviously increases their risk and vulnerability to take part in substance misuse and then criminalised activities. So we're seeing a lot of that happening. And there's a lot more, I would say, rural isolation where we've got people that really need the support in the sort of like areas such as the parts of Cirencester, South Cerney, Ashton Keynes, that are struggling to get in because of the lack of transport. So obviously they can't come here and access some of the resources and services that we offer because of just the financial restrictions of being able to get anywhere. So that in turn means that we need more staffing to do outreach projects, which again is costing more money. So it's a knock-on effect all round, to be honest, that we're seeing that, you know, there is more demand, but also it's affecting a lot younger people as well, definitely.
That's interesting. So affecting more younger people in what ways? In lack of transport getting to services?
Yeah, a lot of young people, I would say, can't engage in the services because they don't have the transport to be able to do that. So they can't afford, you know, if the transport, say, costs of buses have been cut for once a day, then people can't get in here because they'd have to have a taxi to get back. So it's the same if it's in the rural communities of Gloucestershire and Stroud, they can't access the services. So it involves then the outreach projects being able to go out to them, which is also very limited on time when we've got more people needing the service in the first place. You know, it's a real knock-on effect. And in Swindon particularly, I know that's not Gloucestershire, but in Swindon we run a sex workers outreach programme, and we're seeing more people that are coming out for food. You know, it's just simple things as food, because food is costing so much money. You know, so we're getting limited provisions from, you know, Fair Share that come to us. So there's less food all round. So, you know, people are just wanting things like simple things as food.
Okay. Yeah. Carol, you're next. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Carol. I'm
Tracy.
from Citizens Advice. I notice Elizabeth's here, so I'm sure she'll shout if her area doesn't reflect ours. But we're certainly seeing at least 20% increase in demand for our advice services compared to last year, and that's obviously what we can measure and is coming through. It's very difficult to measure people trying to access help but aren't successfully getting through. We are seeing a disproportionate impact of cost of living on single households and people with disabilities. There's a very clear trend of searches on our web and our face-to-face and phone advice for people looking for more support if they're on PIP or health-related benefits. more support for people, say single households, regardless of age and gender. There's also very clear evidence that ethnic minority groups are being disproportionately impacted by the issues of cost of living. And we're certainly also seeing people coming to us with far more complex and multiple issues. So gone are the days when people would just come with a council tax debt. Now they're coming with housing issues, food issues, energy debts. So it's getting more and more complicated, more and more in depth to deal and come up with solutions. And the other really alarming trend that we're seeing is real challenges for us to actually find solutions for people, especially people coming with debt issues. Again, gone are the days when you can work with people to look at their budgets and make it balance. We're working with people now with debts, and it is impossible to make their minimum outgoings match their incoming income. And it's really, really difficult to now find solutions. It's much more time consuming. It's much more complex. People's mental health is still impacted by COVID. People's resilience is much lower to deal with their own issues. So it's an alarming picture. Bearing in mind we're not even really in winter yet. Who knows, we're bracing ourselves for the impact of interest rates regardless of what happens today, and people coming to us with issues around housing. So it is a very, very challenging picture nationally and locally. And just an overall figure, nationally, Citizens Advice are receiving a minimum of 2 calls every minute just on cost of living. And that takes out all the other issues. And for the first time, we're starting to see cost of living issues become the main issue over all other issues that we're dealing with. So it's for this time of year, bearing in mind what we have to come, it is quite an alarming picture.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol. So next will be Miranda, then Joanna Hammond, and then John Reed. So Joanna, you're next.
Is that me now?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jo Hammond. I'm the CEO at Cotswold Friends. We're a charity in the North and South Cotswolds that help older and vulnerable people. I just wanted to comment really that we are seeing increasing demand. We do have waiting lists at the moment for a number of the services that we provide, such as befriending and carer support. And obviously one of the issues as well is working hard to continue recruiting volunteers that can then help those people. We are seeing also more complex cases coming through, so people with higher needs, with additional needs, with mental health needs, all sorts of things that kind of complicate the cases as well further. And we may need to refer people on to additional services more so than we did before for all sorts of different support elements. And people are worrying about the future. I mean, they're talking to us about, you know, just being worried about what's coming and how they are going to manage. So it's just to report that back. And then just one comment back on what Tracy was saying. We might be able to help with transport in Cirencester. We help older and vulnerable people, and we do have a community car service that runs in Cirencester and the surrounding area. People can join that as a member. So, you know, do get in touch if we can help from that point of view as well. Thank you.
Joanna, brilliant, and welcome, because I know you're fairly new into role. And
I am, yes, almost a year actually. It's gone so fast. I can't believe it.
I'm embarrassed. I need to meet more of you face to face. So it's brilliant to have you and see you.
So apologies. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Miranda. Miranda, have you got?
Great. No,
Miranda.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Miranda Eales. I'm the Community Hubs Development Lead at Creative Sustainability in Stroud. So my role is to support a network of community hubs all over the district. And I asked for their feedback for this meeting because many of them couldn't make it. And I got quite a lot of feedback. I won't go into all the different details, but very similar to what previous people have said around increase in demand. Some of the hubs have seen sort of 30% increase in terms of their food, so their shelves are completely empty. many more people coming into things like community cafes where they have citizens advice and the food bank and clean slate there. One thing that a couple of hubs have mentioned is given the kind of unease and anxiety levels in the community, they're seeing that translated into the hubs. So they're having to, many of these hubs are run by volunteers and they simply don't have the staffing around even simple things like security. So some communities, some of the hubs have seen that people gather when they know the food deliveries are coming in from FareShare, and it's disrupting, and it's increase in antisocial behaviour, and just when people are desperate, they resort to desperate measures. And the community hubs that because they're so much on the front line, they're seeing that, and they're not necessarily equipped to deal with that in terms of having volunteers to help manage that, and then being able to manage that themselves around their own resilience. And then a couple of things around young parents who are having to pay out for childcare are struggling to stay in their jobs because the cost of childcare and the bills are getting too much. And people that are housebound and use online food deliveries can't use the voucher system to do that. So I'm just reading some of the stuff.
Really?
And then finally, people that are self-employed are finding that their clients are also cutting back, but they're not sure what they're entitled to because they get earning from self-employment. Obviously, we've heard that nationally as an issue as a group of people, but that's just some of the feedback that I've got from some of the hubs.
That's super helpful, Miranda. We'd be really, really appreciative if there's anything you can send us as well, just as a, what you pulled together would be hugely helpful. I think the piece around people with disabilities ordering online and vouchers not being able to be used, I mean, it just sounds crazy to me. Is there any way of us influencing solutions around some of these what seem like basic issues that should be sorted, just don't get sorted? I mean, why can't these vouchers be used online is my question, I guess, and who's trying to tackle some of these things?
Yeah, I can see from I think that if that comes out of the district council, I don't know, I'd have to follow up on that. I only got that this morning. I haven't had time to follow up on it.
Brilliant. Okay, probably one to take offline. Thank you so much, Miranda, really appreciate it. So it's Joanna Hammond, John Reed, Elizabeth, and then Dave, JPDL.
Just to quickly say, if anyone else wants to comment in the chat box, if you don't feel like you want to share something by talking, but if you want to pop your experience or just a sort of a little summary of how you're finding things in the chat box, then that will also feed into
that would be brilliant
research too.
And do interrupt me, Sarah, if there are questions coming through in the chat box, let me know and I can do that in between people talking. So John, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. I chair Working for Wellbeing in Fairford and Lechlade areas, and we set up about a year or so ago as a charity. We signpost people to the services like CAB, like Food Bank, like P3, which can help them. And we also provide digital support so that they can use their smartphones or whatever to order groceries, whatever. We have gone from about 6 people attending these cafes to about 50. And what we do is we ask CAB, Food Bank, P3, Warm and Well to come in and talk, and they're getting an increasing number of referrals. People perhaps were a little bit reluctant to do this in the past, but they're certainly not reluctant now. And I would echo what was said by an earlier speaker about what we call a transport poverty in our areas. It's a real problem, and I would like to talk to anybody who could provide help with that area, and help indeed for carers. And what I would say is also that we have seen an increase in one-to-one help for people with loneliness and isolation problems. We work very closely with Sue Black, who runs People for You, and she's getting an increasing number of people who are getting involved in this. You mentioned the possibility of the presence of the BBC. We'd be very happy to get involved with that. That would be of use to you.
Could you put your details in the chat box? Is that possible? Just so we can capture them. That would be absolutely brilliant. So anybody interested in getting involved in the BBC piece, please put your details in the chat box, because we'll download that after this as well. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate your feedback. I'm just thinking around the rural isolation and loneliness. I think one charity that we've supported for a long time, mainly because they're stuck out right at the edge, is Cotswold Friends, with Joanna, who do an incredible job at supporting. Well, there's not a lot of support sort of from Cirencester across Morton in the Marsh. It's a huge long county, and in between is the Cotswolds, which sounds incredibly wealthy, but as we all know, there's huge deprivation in every single Cotswold town, and Joanna does an amazing job around this transport issue, whether Joanna can share with others who are finding isolation, rural isolation and transport issues, whether Joanna may be able to share how they've set up the support and the volunteers and the transport links. Maybe Joanna, you can do a piece on that, because it sounds like it's going to be really important as people can't access services now more than ever. Thank you, John. Was there anything else?
No, that was it. I just to reiterate that whole point about transport. If Joanna, if we can get together one more time on that one, I'd be really grateful.
So Elizabeth Hall.
Hi, yes.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm CEO at Citizens Vice President Stroud and Cotswold District. I'm echoing pretty much what I think everybody's seeing and feeling. I think some things for us that we're seeing, clients who can't afford the minimum oil. A minimum oil delivery is about £500 at the moment, which is just, you know, unreachable. And even when they say about putting an extra £100 for clients who are on oil, their £400 has still gone on their electricity, and they need it now. They need that oil now. So we've certainly seen sort of real issues with people wanting oil. Rural isolation, we had a client in the Cirencester office last week who can have one bus a week, and he's got no mobile signal in his village either. And so just he's stumped either way, really. Needed, and in fact he did come in to get a supermarket voucher that he could then spend at Tesco in Cirencester while he was there. So really just really isolated and in need. We would love to do more outreach. We've been working with Miranda in the hubs in Stroud, and we've got a waiting list, because we need to be where people need us. We can't just rely anymore on them coming into Stroud and Cirencester, and they can't all be dealt with on the phone or by email. So it's just a real feeling of sort of needing to be out there, but you haven't got the resources to meet that sort of demand. I think two areas that I'd be concerned about is people who are just off the sort of cost of living payments. So people who just off pension credit, just earn a little bit too much for the benefits system to have given them that cost of living payment. It's that just above that we're really concerned about, because they didn't get that 650. And so we're seeing a lot of families in that position, and a lot of pensioners really who maybe have a tiny private pension and are really struggling now. And just
to say, Elizabeth, can I interject? Is anyone here from Age UK? No. I know Age UK are doing quite a lot of work with older people, where they do a bit of a debt crisis management piece, and often there are so many available funds that they don't know about, and obviously there's huge millions and millions of unclaimed funds. I just wonder whether Age UK has quite a piece to help maybe anyone dealing with the older people in the county that need support. I've just met with the new chief exec. He's great. I must try and sort of link you guys up, because they are dealing with the information at hand and have it all to hand to share. So I just wonder whether Age UK and Gloucester can help with some of the information around what available funds there are for older people that often don't know they can claim them. They help them fill out the forms, they help them get the money. So there is that help needed. And if any of you have got these hubs, or you've, like John, you've got people dropping in, maybe Age UK could come and do some visit work. So just thinking out loud if that's a possibility.
Tally, not wanting to jump in, but they they definitely have a pot of money that they've been given to respond to this. So
Okay.
they don't have the funding to actually do the work, but they have the money to give out. So I think there's some creative thinking around actually how we get that money to where they need it to be without actually having the staff funding to do the piece of work. And I know that's something they're trying to work on at the moment.
Brilliant. So Tracy's one of our trustees who runs Young Gloucestershire, for all of those who haven't met Tracy yet or know her well. So yes, that's brilliant information. So we probably need to bring Age UK into this. Okay, that's brilliant. Elizabeth, anything else?
I think there is just that confusion as well, isn't there, with older people that, you know, we've seen it, we talked about it today at our AGM, that, you know, this feeling that they're hearing the news, they will actually, a lot of them will be okay. They've had, you know, they'll get their cost of living payment, they'll get their, you know, winter fuel, they will be okay, but they don't feel that they're going to be okay, and they're frightened, and they're turning the heating off now and being cold when actually they probably can. They probably might be able to make ends meet, or they probably can make ends meet, but all the information and the scaremongering, I think, is scaring them. I think there's a bit of an information, you know, need for really good quality information. We've had them turning up on the door as well with mobile phones saying, "Is this a scam?" Because I think there's such fear around that's a big factor. I think, especially for older people who might, you know, be prey to, you know, sort of prone to, you know, people preying on them for scams and energy scams. So I think that's just, you know, something to think about.
Surviving winter, we put the stats together, and actually Gloucestershire had some of the highest excess winter deaths in the country. So I think, yes, there's probably older people that will make ends meet, but in our county traditionally we haven't had the stats updated, but it was about 400 excess winter deaths over the winter period, and that's because people can't afford to eat or heat, and they're deciding between the two. They don't die from it, they often die from a respiratory issue that's exacerbated by the cold. But we do in this county have real issues around heating. So whether the houses are very old, you know, rural communities, old houses, lack of proper heating. So I think, Elizabeth, there's definitely a piece around these older people need this information, but there's a definite piece of people dying that nobody knows.
Yeah,
because they are cold.
It's that two thing. I mean, we had somebody though who did, I know we saw somebody at a cost of living event last week who said, "I've got £100,000 worth of savings, but I don't want to spend them, so I'm having my showers at the leisure centre."
God, well, it would be nice if they distribute it and shared it with amongst their friends. Maybe. Anyway, brilliant. Thank you for that. Dave, JPDL, you're next. Hi, Dave, from Your Next Move.
Hi, yes. I'm a freelance artist, and I was brought into this by an organisation called Your Next Move.
Yeah.
So we will, during the half programs over the summer holidays and school breaks, we'll run creative practice that runs in tandem with the food parcels that are delivered, to kind of almost take the stigma out of visiting a food bank almost.
Oh, amazing.
So it becomes more of a fun activity for the family to get involved with rather than queuing up to receive a food parcel. And also because I'm freelance, I work across the county in various different places. So I do like a repeat workshop at Trinity Church, where we kind of do a poetry session where the participants in there can kind of talk about some of these issues that have been raised in the conversation. So kind of anxiety and depression that may build up with regards to the issues that people are facing. I mean, I guess it's kind of almost like an anecdotal piece of evidence that I've got to offer up here, but I have firsthand seen the number of participants in all of the different places that I'm working go up almost twofold, and almost seeing a broader cross-section of people in some of the places that I work. So for instance, the Trinity workshops, I'm seeing just a much broader cross-section of people arriving, rather than, you know, a few years ago, it might be, I guess, not to, you know, generalize or anything, but maybe people with mental health issues or maybe substance misuse problems arriving. But now I'm seeing a lot of older people arriving into that workshop and that space that I'm working with. And I think that kind of where I, as an artist, could fit into this is I'm kind of using this discussion as almost like a research and development time, because I'd like to make a film to kind of raise awareness of what people are facing in the county.
Yeah.
I think that you were right when you said that there's almost a bit of a disconnect in places like Cheltenham Town, for instance, or Stroud, where people who aren't getting touched by the pressures of what's going on at the moment almost kind of may not really recognize it as a reality. And I think that you know, I've done like pieces of art and I've done like films for Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees, and because I do a repeat workshop at the Quaker Church, the Friendship Cafe, where all the kind of where displaced people who are based in Cheltenham will meet. And they kind of do, as well as all their English lessons and stuff, they do food as well. And I've seen a massive increase in the people attending that space as well. So I think that the idea that creating a piece of art that could run, maybe, because I did bits that were played out on Points West and stuff like that. So maybe if we could channel a piece of art to those, down those channels and onto those platforms, it might help to actually drive home a realization to an area in Gloucestershire that is actually quite polar. Like, you really do have people who have so much here, and that's mirrored in the people that don't have that much. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that I've seen firsthand an increase in demand for services.
Dave, that's really interesting. I think that's a piece that we need to take into the next session around supporting the solutions. I think there's a really nice joined up piece around stigma. So a lot of people queuing at food banks have never queued before. And, you know, the effects around how people are feeling that they're having to turn to services is, you know, affecting mental health, families. It's just heart-wrenching, and I think somebody like you could make the journey so much more accessible, and the children then feel it's a fun thing to do rather than stigma attached to, you know, trying to access food. So I think that's an amazing thing you're doing, and it would be wonderful to continue some of that thinking around supporting the solutions, and maybe others in the group who need some support around this area thinking about that. That's wonderful. Thank you, Dave. Elizabeth Goff next.
Oh, hi there. I'm Liz. I work as a fundraiser at the Family Haven. So we're a charity that supports vulnerable families in Gloucestershire. So we're seeing an increase in the number of refugees and asylum seekers needing our support.
Okay.
I've been at the charity over a year and a half now, and yeah, I've just really noticed kind of the increase in these families coming in day to day. They're staying in temporary accommodation in a hotel in Gloucester. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is they're not receiving, I guess, adequate meals. So it's actually affecting their health and well-being. We've got pregnant mummies coming in who are getting poorly because of the food they're receiving. So obviously they're coming to us. We run healthy workshops at the charity. We provide lunches and we provide breakfast. So coming to us, they have a healthy meal, and already in a few months, you know, the feedback we've received is how much better the mummies feel for having a healthy meal. The problem we've got, and it's been touched on twice in this conversation, is they can't afford to always come into the centre. So obviously getting a bus from where they're staying in Cheltenham to come to us is an issue, because they are surviving on very little money per week. So, you know, we are noticing that, as I say, that's a major issue. And also in terms of the food we're providing, like our fruit bowls of, you know, we buy fruit and it's literally gone, because what they're doing is they're taking the fruit home to the hotel, because they basically have no cooking facilities. So they are taking what they can from us. But as I say, we're then seeing a huge demand in the food that we're having to provide for them. So not necessarily an increase in numbers overall, but as I say, in the type of kind of communities that we're actually supporting. And as I said, I've really noticed it kind of, I guess I hadn't really seen kind of the level of impact, kind of, as I say, of some of these mums and the food they're getting and how poorly it's making them. I've never really seen that before. So yeah, from our perspective, as I say, it's having an impact on food costs, and obviously we want to do more.
Elizabeth, it's Tracy jumping in again, just checking there's a whole group of people meeting to look at this issue. Are you involved in that group? So there's a group
I haven't
been meeting,
involved in it.
looking at the issues that have been affected by those refugees and those living in some of the hotels. I know Adele is left, but it's definitely worth connecting with Adele Owen on that.
Okay, brilliant. We do have quite a lot of contact with Adele, and that would be through our centre manager, because as I said, the fundraiser
so it may
charity,
be that you're represented, but there's a whole group of people coming together from across Gloucestershire to have a look at the challenges that are being faced, and definitely in that group. I think it meets even weekly or fortnightly, and that issue that you're raising has definitely been discussed in the last meeting. So Leanne's on,
Leanne,
as
thanks,
well.
Leanne.
So it'd be good just to connect in with that, because that's a much wider issue than just you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leanne. No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Well, that's us hearing it for the first time. So maybe many of you may also be hearing it for the first time. So refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks, Tracy and Leanne, for starting to link some of this up. That's absolutely brilliant. Helen Logan, you're next.
Hi, hello. I'm from Play Gloucestershire. I was going to jump in response to Elizabeth to say we are also being approached to work with those families in the hotels. And we do have a small play space, outdoor play space. And we also have an electric people carrier. So we are looking at putting together, hopefully working with the families, bringing them somewhere. We also have fire pits, so we could do communal cooking, and we're aware that that might be a useful activity. So we should definitely get in touch, I think, because we might be able to help some of the families that you're working with. With regards to impact in our charity, I'm the office manager, so I've asked for some feedback from people. We've seen children coming in who are hungrier to our play sessions, so we're providing more food. But something that's happened more recently, that's starting to happen, is kids maybe are being told they can't come out because they can't get their clothes dirty, or they don't have the right shoes. They've only got school shoes, and obviously the families don't want them getting their school shoes messed up. We've not heard this before. The other thing that is happening is our rangers are having to talk to more and more parents, because the parents are worried. We've got leaflets and signposting information that we provide to them as best we can. So I suspect we're going to start to see more impact as we go into our October half-term play sessions, and also leading up to winter. But that's the feedback I can give you at the moment.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, that's really concerning, isn't it, when you're seeing new trends? And I think that's the piece we've got to get across to the wider community, all sectors, businesses, individuals. We've started to get donations from people that have just seen a piece written. It's about getting the message out there and highlighting the need to donate the rebate and support. And this evidence is compelling to encourage those not to think that COVID is all over and we've all gone back to normal, because we just haven't. Things are actually much worse in some areas. So thank you for the information, and that will be hugely useful to, I'm sure, everybody on this call who can respond in some way, in their own ways, and whether they're from different sectors. Anybody else? I don't have any more hands up. Have I missed anyone? Let me just scroll through. Okay, that's brilliant. I think that's everybody at the moment. So next question. I think we've covered a lot of this. We've put, have you seen a change in the needs of your clients? I think some of that has already come through. Anything that hasn't been said already in terms of different needs, a change in needs? Is there any other patterns or information that's coming through? Anybody who can enlighten us a little bit further on this, unless everything's been said on this subject? Okay, on to the next. Oh, no, Elizabeth, you've got your hand up. You've just caught me out, but I've spoken to you. The next question is, what expenses or resources are decreasing or increasing? This is around expenses and resources. We have been given a piece around obviously funding challenges, but also volunteers. Have you got enough other resources you rely on? And it would be really good to understand whether you're seeing an increase or decrease on expenses or resources. I'm sure things aren't decreasing, but you never know. So you've got to ask the question, an open question. What expenses or resources are decreasing or increasing? Who would like to make a start on that conversation?
I don't mind.
Brilliant. Is that Tracy?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, what I would say that we're noticing was we're having, as the cost of living is going up, people's wages, I would say, are not going up with inflation. So we're having struggle even recruiting staff because the wages that the care industry will offer is a lot lower than some of the other industries. So obviously we cannot necessarily get the staff, the right staff and the skilled staff to actually work in the first place, where it would be relying on volunteers. But obviously anybody that is volunteering, they've also got to be able to be self-sufficient and have enough money to look after themselves. So we're not getting the volunteers in as much. So it's the actual funding core costs are more expensive, from like, you know, for the building premises, the heating, all those kind of things, to even recruitment, with people not having people necessarily come through for jobs because, you know, it's not enticing them to want to work for us, because it just doesn't match what they need when they might be able to do something else where they've worked at home or whatever. So it's having a knock-on effect on what we can offer as well.
So in terms of funding, is this a barrier? So where we can see the increased needs on supporting core costs, are you finding this an issue when funders aren't necessarily wanting to support this yet?
Yeah,
don't
sometimes
quite understand this area yet, that it sounds like a very dull thing to support, and we would just want to keep seeing projects every 5 minutes.
This is it.
Is there a way of us encouraging the funding community to understand now is the time to support core costs?
Yeah, I think this is it, because a lot of charities, because I do a lot of the bid writing for things, and a lot of the charities won't fund the core costs. So we're struggling, and, you know, I can write out bids and they're just being turned down straight away because so many other people are trying it. And, you know, it's really difficult because we're seen as a bigger charity, but also we've still got massive core costs with having big properties to try and fund and heat, as well as doing the different interventions that we do. So it is a major thing, and of course it does put people off for funding us. But it's something that still has to carry on, otherwise we'll have people's jobs that will end up being made redundant.
So is anyone having success with encouraging funding to come through to support your overheads going up and your core costs? Is there any light on that topic? I'll go on to Carol. Carol, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it was definitely up before you asked about success. Just to say, yeah, we are struggling with volunteers, we are struggling with recruitment of staff, any staff, I mean, even willing and competent people that we can train. It is a real issue. And there are challenges, especially if you hold existing contracts or existing funding, on how you uplift staff salaries and costs, because you've already kind of costed it out without then cutting what you're delivering. But the other thing that we are thinking about, and it's a real concern, is even if we found additional funding to fund uplifts in staff costs, you know, to match or get closer to inflation, is actually how is that sustainable longer term, and actually how are we ever going to secure funding at salaries that are going up at 7, 8, 9%? So you want to do it to support your staff and keep good staff, and, you know, make sure they're not the ones needing your service. But even if you secure funding this year or next year for those increases, actually to sustain those level of salaries in bids and tenders and to remain competitive, it's a very difficult balance and thought process to to go through. So it isn't just about securing those funding pots now, it's how is that sustainable long term, if there is a big shift in salaries that are needed across the sector especially.
Yeah, we're hearing that. The other thing is around your volunteers. We're also hearing that some of the volunteers, I think it may have been touched on earlier, that your volunteers are struggling with the crisis in front of them. So as people are coming through the doors, they're really struggling with how desperate people are for the first time, feeling like they need to close the doors in order to protect their staff and volunteers. That is really worrying. And I just wonder, with someone like Dave, the creative arts side, somebody that is able to support the volunteers and to support the you know, the crisis feel, that if people come in, maybe there's a way of helping your charities help your volunteers. I'm just thinking about some of that around the volunteers you do have, not losing them or exhausting them. So around your resources, is there a way of supporting core costs and encouraging funders to support core costs and our donors and anyone who wants to give money? And also, how do we support your volunteers, either attracting new or keeping the existing ones you have?
I'll just jump in there. The way that I've been digesting and see how my role could be impactful is through a film, and that film would be to kind of raise awareness for the crisis itself, but also to kind of like seed support and almost kind of make a film that creates a more kind of human angle for this to be perceived.
Yeah,
as I said, it's you know, if you're not touched by it, it's so easy to, as you said yourself, it's not like the kind of COVID crisis that we've all just been through, and you know, whereas we were all kind of locked in and on the same page with it, it's very much subjective to where you live, your kind of your upbringing in many contexts. It's kind of it's a subjective pressure that we're all under. So I think that like a piece of art that could connect with everybody on a human level is how I see that.
So that communication piece.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Anna, you've got your hand up next.
Thank you. Just to reiterate what people have been saying about salaries. I mean, obviously in real terms, our sort of relatively low paid staff are seeing a reduction in their salary. And I'm really keen that funders notice that there's a lot of work that's already been commissioned where these salaries are now not really, you know, a good wage, a living wage. And that rather than asking for new work, we should be consolidating what we're already doing and possibly doing some kind of retrospective analysis of those salaries so that we're actually not, as a sector, putting people into the very situation that we're talking about. I think it's really problematic.
So Anna, is that around flexible funding, about being able to go back to your funder and having those open and honest conversations? Maybe there is a change in your project or a change in the way you work in order to make it commercially viable. So are you hoping to go back to your funders and have those open conversations?
I would be really, really glad if we were invited to do that. I think it's an important conversation that needs to be had. It's not going to be everybody in your organisation, but you know, there are definitely in these lower paid jobs some really significant problems that we're going to see.
Great, thanks, Anna. Anybody else? Sarah, do you want to pull anything out of the chat that we need to be highlighting?
There's some really good conversation around, I think, how we can be creative about providing our support to reduce stigma. A lot of interest also in Dave's film, which also I'm really interested in, because I'm aware for us as an organisation having a really creative way of getting that message to our donors and people that we're working with. I think it would just be fantastic for the whole county really to have a really great visual piece that captures some of these
That
issues
helps
everybody's
inspire.
facing and helps to inspire those people that are really unaware.
Yeah.
A lot of people are saying the same struggles with recruitment. I think we've also heard as an organisation a lot around some of those lower paid staff and how you give that uplift, and it's something we're looking into doing through one of our programmes where we're actually might be able to do that on multi-year grants to see whether we might be able to give a little bit of an uplift on the second year of the grant, where people have budgeted based on a completely different situation last year or the year before even. So it's really important for us to be aware. I'm not sure necessarily how easy it's going to be to have the funds to be able to do that in every case, but it's certainly something we should be striving to think about and to do our best to support people.
Brilliant. Okay. Anything else?
Anything else? Liz had mentioned there's a cost of living fund available, and the Aviva Community Fund have a scheme where they'll match donations.
Oh, brilliant.
And then Jane was mentioning about actually attempting to ask members for an uplift in the amount they would pay, but actually that's really restrictive, and it's going to mean that people actually wouldn't be able to access that service. So it's weighing up what you can do as an organisation, I think, but then wanting to provide the support that you can continue providing the support that you do to the people that you're working with.
Great. I guess the rest of our questions are tied in a bit. The next one was, is the crisis impacting your funding and fundraising? I think we're hearing this. Yes, it is impacting your funding and fundraising. Is there anything around impacting your funding or fundraising that we haven't already discussed? Anything to enlighten us about the challenges around funding and fundraising that will help us deliver better or help us influence the world of fundraising as much as we can? So there's a piece around the communication with funders and whether there's flexibility. We've signed up to the IVAR principles. We haven't particularly launched and discussed that in a big way, but we've signed up to the IVAR principles. We feel they're incredibly important as modern funders. If anyone wants to look into the IVAR principles, most of you may already know them, but this is about being here to serve and doing the very best to serve our charities in a quick and efficient manner. So we are going to try and encourage everyone to sign up to the IVAR principles who hasn't, and we want to encourage our donors and our board and everybody to be inspired by the IVAR principles. And this is, funding is there to enable communities and charities to deliver as effectively and as best as they can without us creating barriers and blocks. So we have signed up to the IVAR principles. So it's really anything you think that we should be doing that reduces barriers or helps with funding and fundraising. I've got a few more hands up. Abby, Nicole, I think you're next, then Nick, Penny, Sue Potter, and then Tracy Bayliss. Abby, I think you need to come off mute.
Can I unmute?
I haven't said that for a while.
We should be used to it by now, but hey, yeah, a barrier certainly from the space that we're trying to offer as a warm room is that we are so inefficient with our heating.
Sorry, Abby, where are you from?
Cam and Dursley.
Cam and Dursley.
Yeah, so Cam and Dursley, where we are situated is perfect to support some of the most vulnerable, but our building is so leaking, and so I'm desperately trying to get the space warmer so that we are not wasting money and that the money we do spend on the community is worthwhile. So certainly in my bids it's really tricky at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Nick Penny. And Nick has got a couple of hats. He's also on our community grants panel for main grants. So, and you've got other hats, Nick. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, so I'm wearing my project manager Forest Voluntary Action Forum hat today. And sort of just where we're really kind of getting involved in this cost of living stuff is trying to coordinate the community response, like so many of the mutual aid groups did with the sort of the initial COVID lockdowns, and really how we can build on that sort of capital of volunteers within the community to deliver as much support as we can as quickly as possible through a coordinated approach. So not having 3 warm spaces in the same street and then nothing in the next village and so on. So
that's interesting.
Yes, so we're trying to take a very similar approach actually to COVID in terms of some of that coordination. But the comment I was going to make sort of around funding, the comment rather than anything for discussion really, is how we balance the reaction to the cost of living crisis, which is the absolute need right now, against the ongoing need for funding for these projects that strengthen communities. That during COVID, we saw some of that funding obviously closed down to react to the immediate need, and how we, as maybe as a community foundation, make sure that we still look to support the amazing work of communities. So, as I say, not necessarily one for discussion or response, but a concern that's perhaps bubbling at the back of my mind.
So Nick, that's definitely what we'll be talking about in our next session. I think it's already half the tickets are booked. So if you want to join us on November, this is about supporting the solutions and a piece around visioning the future. So yes, we've got to react to today. Our last 3 days at UKCF, and we're all cerebrally knackered thinking about the future. It has been very intense, but it has been a good reality check for us that we do react to today, but we must be visioning the future. And we had such inspiring speakers and such inspiring discussions that definitely, Nick, we mustn't take our foot off visioning our future. I think the strap line for me that was really important was, do we want to live in a world we've built, or do we want to live in a world we are building? And I think that's the piece about continuing supporting the amazing projects that will make change. So thank you, Nick. Sue Potter.
Hi, I'm from the Rock in Cheltenham, which is actually a youth organisation, and we're only really indirectly dealing with these sorts of things, although we have been asked to host a food bank for the local area within our premises. But I would say that when it comes to funding, core costs and certainly project related costs like salaries and utilities, you know, it's all very well saying, oh well, we're going to have a food bank, but a food bank is going to need you know, the area that we're setting aside for the food bank, they've got to install sockets and all sorts of stuff. It's going to need equipment. Therefore there's going to be running costs associated with it. You know, it's all very well people saying they want to fund projects, but they also have to appreciate that those projects have costs that are important alongside the actual cost of the food or whatever it is. And that I've noticed with a lot of funders seems to be a bit of an issue.
Thanks, Sue. Good points. Tracy.
Yeah, what I was going to say was what we're finding is there's a lot more people that want to collaboratively work together to form solutions. And I think it's making sure that we have got the avenue to do that. And also this is the ideal space to be able to operate and do that and discuss it, because some people may be doing similar work where it could be joined up together and take part in projects where funding could be for both. And there's a lot of funds out there where that could be maximised to full potential by doing that, not replicating the work as such, but also just making sure that we're all on the same page, really. And I think making sure that goes across Gloucestershire and even a lot of the rural areas in Gloucestershire that I know from speaking to other people, especially like in the Forest of Dean, where they're struggling with support. It's making sure that they've got a voice as well. So having something like this has been brilliant today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tracy. And yeah, do you know what? It's all about joining up the dots. I think The work we did in COVID was amazing because we all spoke on Zoom a lot. It was exhausting, but we made such connections. We really started to understand, and for us, certainly understand the picture of what was going on. We have all gone back to face and to, you know, back to sort of some sort of life outside of Zoom, but then are we keeping up those connections of still understanding what everybody's doing in order to, like Tracy says, that duplication, that collaboration. So I think understanding what everybody needs, and if it is something like this, it's so easy to put together. I know when I've spoken to people and they've said, oh, I joined one of your events. It wasn't actually the event that was very interesting, haha. But actually chatting in the chat box with someone, and now I'm working with them, was absolutely vital. So if we just have to do these sorts of things that enables people to meet, just a meeting place or a connection place, then if we know that's needed, then we will certainly continue to support that. So thank you, Tracy. Joanna Hammond, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just want to make a general comment on funding. For our organisation, it's a really complex picture. So because we have 7 or 8 different services running, it's a real jigsaw for funding and how that comes together. So we have a very limited amount of statutory funding that comes into the organisation. So most of what we do has to come through grants and trusts, which is a constant stream of writing applications, as you can imagine. We are looking at how we can do more sustainable funding, how we can bring more money into the organisation ourselves by the things that we do. But again, that takes resource in order to do that. So we have to look carefully at, you know, what we can manage to do while still continuing to run our services. I think the most stressful element of the funding side of things is that the majority of the funding that we're able to apply for does tend to be relatively short term. And when I say short term, I perhaps mean 12 months. If we can get a piece of funding in that's 2 to 3 years, that's amazing, because it means that we can plan properly and we know that we've got that platform to run something over a longer period of time. It gives you that stability, I suppose, as an organisation. But generally, it's on a short-term footing, which, you know, as you can imagine, then makes a complex sort of jigsaw of pieces of funding coming in for us to manage. Hugely appreciative of any funding that comes our way, of course. I don't want to imply that that's not the case, but, you know, when funding is longer term and that's more difficult to gain, it does make things difficult and requires resource to continue funding the organisation.
So that's a really good point, Joanna, and one we talked as a community foundation network, where sat in the room was a huge amount of money in people's endowments and pots, and well, you know, what is the responsibility of that money? And longer sustainable funding was a really big conversation that we needed to really understand. Is it 3-5 years? You know, how do we fund for the long term? And I guess with the constraints of also wanting to fund as many people as we can.
Absolutely.
And it's a real challenge, but I do think you're very, you know, it's a really important piece that us and the board and the trustees will need to work on, in terms of how can we leverage more support from our donors and our funders to want to support 1, 2, 3 years for sustainability. So a really, really good feedback to help us with that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, is your hand up? Carol.
Yes, just an extra point really. It's a bit of a plea. You're already kind of doing it, but it's kind of defend it. We are seeing a very clear national picture when it comes to trust grants, commissioning, around the loss of the more expensive work, the face-to-face, but that's where we really reach the most vulnerable, and how we actually work and make a difference to the most vulnerable. So, you know, they've used COVID as an excuse. You can do everything through Zoom and Teams and it's the solution to all ills, and they're going very much down that, oh, we can reach more people, but it's a real plea really, especially locally, to defend the importance of the slightly more expensive delivery in some circumstances, and maintaining that face-to-face element to really be able to reach and support the most vulnerable in the community. So I know you're doing it now, but I think there is a real battle that will come. There'll be the clash from this national and local, and I think it's something really important, certainly locally, that we must maintain that face-to-face support in the services that we provide.
Yeah, really good point. Thank you, Carol. Anybody else with a hand up? Anybody else like to add I think that's fine. So just quickly, probably the last one to sum up, are there any other main challenges you are facing that we haven't already discussed? Any other main challenges? Anything that we haven't covered? Penny? Abby?
I think certainly from what I'm seeing with my Create Gloucestershire and Cameron Dursley hats, is that it's how we support into the evening. So post-school pickups, people coming home from work, how do we create an environment that's easy to access and sustainable? And certainly, you know, then as volunteers or as staff ourselves, how do we sustain from the morning all the way into the evening?
Anyone else experiencing these challenges with the evening and the children? Anybody else facing these challenges that maybe can link up with Abby? Tracy?
Yeah, what I would say, the challenges that we've got is obviously offering a service 24/7, and that people need the services at weekends. So for us, when we only operate 9 to 5, we've got a sex workers outreach program that runs twice a week. So we're having to even fund those late on to the evening. So that's staffing, relying on volunteers, but also to offer services at weekends, because we're assuming that people are fine Saturday and Sunday. What about them? That's when things are more just as crucial to have the support 24/7, especially at the moment with the cost of living crisis where people are struggling. So yeah, everything needs to be more sustainable, but also for 24 hours, really. It doesn't just happen between 9 and 5.
Yeah, good point. Dave, are you coming in here?
Yeah, I would say that with that kind of support, with regards to what the point that Abby made, having kind of ongoing creative, like kind of almost ongoing creative practice workshops where they build towards a kind of a collaborative piece, so it can kind of have it can kind of have that time, that post-school kind of drop-off time filled as something that is kind of exciting for kids, that kind of almost, I think, because I've seen how beneficial it is firsthand to have that kind of stigma taken out of going to these type of places after school for young people. And if you can kind of weave in a really positive spin on that, so they get kind of pride from what they achieve, they can also show their parents what they've been developing, and it makes the whole after school time like a really positive experience. I think that's I've just seen it firsthand how powerful that can actually be, because some of the pieces that I've created in these workshops, in these post-school activity sessions, they'll be like developing a piece of graffiti with a graffiti artist. They'll write a piece of poetry about their area, and then that will go up in the area so the whole community can kind of pass by and see it. And it kind of drives a sense of ownership as well as filling up that time after school. And I just think it's a really powerful thing.
I love that. I just wonder, I mean, operationally, in terms of your ebbs and flows, whether everybody's looking, I'm sure you are, at the beneficiary numbers at certain times in the day, and whether there's key times you can close down and reopen in the evening. I don't know whether there's a shift, if there is a need for after school, or if there's a much greater need for some time after school rather than maybe in the mornings, or whether there's, you know, if there is trends, how everybody's able to share those trends. And maybe, you know, if you're looking at funding and services, that's a really compelling sell, isn't it, to try and get funding to support where it's most needed. So really interesting. And Dave, thinking about how to be more creative with those times when children, I know I was a latchkey kid, unfortunately, having to twiddle my thumbs until somebody came home isn't very exciting. So you know, maybe that piece around creativity in those after school moments sounds really exciting. Okay, Anybody else? Oh, I think I've got
Penny's
Bridget
had her
King.
hand up for a while. Sorry,
Oh, who has?
Penny has had
Penny.
her hand up for quite a while.
Hi, Penny.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say really, some of the challenges I think are left over from vulnerable people being told during COVID that they're very vulnerable and they shouldn't go out. And I think that's still a challenge within community work, is encouraging those people to, you know, come out, feel safe in coming out and participating, because I think it's just reinforcing their isolation. So I think when we're thinking about how we can engage with the most vulnerable people within our communities, we also need to understand the dynamics of what they've had force fed to them for the last 2 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Penny. Thanks very much. It's been a really difficult transition, isn't it, with people staying at home and it becoming the norm, and that effort to get out and meet people and reach into the community. It's been a difficult transition, and a really good point. Bridget, did you have your hand up? I'm sure I saw Bridget.
Yes, I did.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi there. At the Spring Centre, we do run after school sessions 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
And obviously the people that we fetch a lot of the children from this milestone, but they also come from other specialist schools, but they can also come from mainstream schools. And it's amazing to see the social interaction that these children have, and they form these friendships, which does give them incredible life skills. And so, you know, there can be some very challenging times for all of those, and that, you know, during COVID, obviously we could see that, and we could see the difference it's made, and getting back into those services. But you know, I'm sure that there's lots more we can do, because I say we run that four evenings a week, where we actually pick the children up from school, give them a meal, and their parents perhaps come and pick them up just before 6 o'clock. But we run sort of what I call a family stay and play twice a week.
Yeah.
2 mornings a week. And we've got our fabulous building, but we're not actually really getting many people in.
Okay.
So I know we've got a resource that if people got in contact with us, well, I'd like, you know, I'm sure there's so much more that we could do in our community to support others.
So Springbank, I visited.
Spring Centre.
Oh, Spring Centre. So remind me where Spring Centre is.
Right, so we're in Quedgley in Gloucester.
Oh, Quedgley, brilliant. So anyone in the Quedgley area, we need to talk about the fact you have a space and an ability to support. So it would be great if anybody wants to get in touch with Bridget.
And of course, you know, if people do have their own transport, or, you know, I have people that walk there, they come on the bus. Obviously, that's another little bit of a challenge, but it's not just restricted to Quedgley. It could be anybody that, you know, has the means to get here. So if any of these people that are here want some premises to utilise, or if they want to come in and be creative with us and help do something more for all the people that come. Like we're running play sessions for the October half term, you know, every day. So there's the resources for the children there. So
that's a
any
brilliant
collaboration would be appreciated.
That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I really hope that somebody and some of you, if you are able to take advantage of that, that sounds absolutely brilliant. I'm just mindful it's just past 4 o'clock and we're finishing at 4. Just to sum up, I think for us, it's really understanding what our role is in terms of, are we trying to support need in the right way? Is there a way of understanding greater what our role is in terms of supporting everybody? And us listening is so important to understand if we are doing that and continue to do that. So anything that you think we should be doing as a funder, and I say it every time, please challenge us. Please tell us what we can do better. We really do want to know these things. I did have, when I first started 3 years ago, someone said to me, Talitha, you haven't been here very long and you're not from sector. I'm just going to warn you. We don't feel we can necessarily tell you as a funder the truth because we don't want to jeopardize our relationship and you might not fund us. And I felt quite uncomfortable about that conversation. And I said, well, I would welcome any challenge at all. And believe me, that is not the way we decide on our funding. And we have a community panel that decides that. And it's not me as the chief exec that decides who gets the money. So please, we're very genuine when we say if there's anything you think we should be doing better or differently, please tell us because we're here to serve. So just to sum up about what is going on for our next session before all of you disappear. Next steps. We're holding the second meeting, and this is about building stronger communities, a bit about what Nick was hoping we would continue to focus on, and that's what makes a stronger community and how are we imagining the future, what needs to happen. And these meetings that we have, it's an open door, we don't have closed door meetings. Everyone is welcome from all organisations, all sectors and all positions. So it's a ticket basis, first come, first serve. We welcome anyone to join us. There is generally 100 ticket limit, but essentially we welcome, communities are made up of everybody. So these are always open door chats, and we hope with our work with the business sector, we will get more people from different sectors interested in hearing what everybody has to say. So I'd like to finish on something to keep our imagination about the future. It's something that was drilled into me over the last 3 days. And this is just an example of imagining the future and feeling that us in communities and the small things that we do, the power that has, because we've got to hold on to it. We have to see that the major change in society doesn't come from politics and policies and top down, push down. It comes often from the people on the ground. And when you look back in history at major change in influence, it comes from somebody in a community inspiring the people around them, and that becomes a movement. And I just really want to leave on this note because that's what I've taken away this week. And I want to bring back to our county that hope that we've had this conversation. We have these enormous challenges in front of us, but we mustn't lose sight of our future. So a single moment can spark a revolution. Collective actions can transform laws. Creative expression can change attitudes, and an invention can alter the course of history. So the example is these threads that we weave together to propel the women's movement, even in the face of obstacles. Imagine the obstacles women have had to get the vote and to get an more equal opportunity into society. The obstacles that faced women in communities that stood up for their right to have a voice, as many people have around the world in various different guises and different movements, that's shaped our lives, the lives we have today. And that has all started from grassroots. So it's so important that we don't think that the politics and the politics that create this storm around us that make us feel completely powerless, that we must remember the power of communities. And that is what a community foundation must hold on to, and try our very best to support the community to keep reimagining the future. So we hope the next session about what are some of the solutions and how can we support the solutions about dealing with the crisis, and then we will do our very best to support you with our funding, but also leveraging all the other resources in our county to create a stronger Gloucestershire. So they're my parting words. It's been a really insightful week thinking about how we continue to work together, and we'll do our very best, and we hope that you feedback anything that you think we should be doing, and any ideas that you have for us to focus on a stronger Gloucestershire. So thank you, everyone. If anyone has someone popped their hand up? Anything anyone wants to finish on before we finish? Any further thoughts or any further feedback? No? Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been really, really valuable to us. We've launched with £25,000. We hope with all of your feedback and our communication into the sector, into communities, that we leverage further funding and we continue to hit our £100,000 and we continue to support you. And we hope that we see many of you in a couple of weeks' time when we have our further conversation. Thank you all so much. Have a brilliant weekend, and really, really, really brilliant meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.